So the business knows how they can use the data, but they don't have access to the data. The IT teams have access to the data and know how to manipulate that data, but don't understand what they need to do for that specific business segment. How do we get those teams talking properly, or how do we get them working together? Why aren't they working together right now to solve this issue?
Yeah, there's methods, and alongside of the cultural shift that we talked about, there's methods. So, historically, internal functions have seen data as a data set. So it's a defined thing. You decide what's in it. You decide how many columns it has. You decide, how many, what the data is made up of, and then you apply some rules to it and so on. But beyond that is the next stage of seeing that as needing to have value. So, if I can't understand exactly what the value of that data is, how do I decide what I want to do to that data? So what you've seen over time in the kind of traditional data and analytics space is, we'll build this view, or we'll create this object, and then over time, someone will come and ask us for something we don't have, so we'll add to it. And then instead of becoming more precise to the value, it becomes broader, with the value becoming less clear. And so the shift really here, if you want to drive value through your data, in my opinion, is, and there's some discussion about this in data management circles, but moving towards data as a product is going to be what brings together traditional centralized data management functions with fast-moving, innovative business analytics. And
I don't get data as a product. Like, what does it change in the construct? Like, how does an organization organize itself around data as a product versus what they do today?
Well, think about those views you've built or the tables you've stood up within your warehouse. They're fairly static. You might be adding things to them. You might be changing the attributes. And then think about a product on Amazon. A product has a life cycle. It has a goal. You're trying to sell it. You're trying to offer benefits. It has a life cycle. It has versions. So if you put a product on Amazon, it's not selling. You evolve the product and you make it better, and then you change the way it is, and you market the product as well, so that people know that it's there and that it's useful, and and it has a cost benefit, which turns into a price, and that dynamic is super important for focusing your efforts, your prioritization, and your future innovation down the road as you evolve your data products, as opposed to being just a data set. It's just data, and therefore it just kind of sits there, and nobody has an expectation of what it's supposed to be used for, and in a lot of cases nobody knows it's even there, right? Because it's not.
So would you look at this like, okay, people started doing chief data officers, we saw those everywhere, right?
Yeah.
And then we have data owners, and those data owners are sort of the conduit between the business and the IT folks, and they own sort of that set of data. Like, what does that look like?
Well, it sounds like a subtle distinction, but it's probably a fairly fundamental shift for organizations. It's the difference between data owners and data product owners. Because if I might own a product that is made up of multiple different data sets. Some of it's from often, right? Most data products, or many data products, have a finance, a numbers component to them, which comes from finance. And if I'm in sales and marketing, I'm almost certainly not using pure sales and marketing data. I'm using sales and marketing data with finance data. So
let me give you my core finance problem.
Who owns it, right? It's like, is that a finance report or a finance, and is it finance data, or is that organizational? And I've heard it done like this, organizational data that's owned by finance that everybody else uses, and so shifting.
But there's a business driver to that, right? Like I just had this problem last week. So like the PTSD is real.
Right.
Where we were reporting on utilization with a certain set of metrics, right? And finance has a whole bunch of math with that. It goes like, that's all gross profit, and that's how all these things hit. And then we realized we were not counting a particular factor in the utilization, and restating history was going to cause everyone a bigger nightmare. But like the operations team's like, screw it, I just want the actual facts. So like, good, let's fix it and move on because I got to operate in the future. And finance is like, ah. And now all of a sudden we created two views of utilization because we want to like keep it. That doesn't change, right? Like those business problems stay.
Well, so in the new world with these data products that sit and the data that sits within them, the objects that sit within them, there's this concept of, without getting too deep, it's a bounded context. In other words, it's okay and this principle comes from the software engineering side. It's okay to have different perspectives on that same set of data on the boundaries where they touch. So if you have clear product ownership, so you've got a context for that same, it's a similar product or it overlaps in part, right? It's okay to have a data owner that understands that this data is being used somewhere else and that there's a different perspective on that because it's needed. The issue is what you want to try and avoid is a heavy proliferation of things that are actually the same, or they're very heavily overlapped, because that doesn't help. And so that clear product portfolio strategy is like, where are we headed with this? Is this the same? Is it different? That problem or that opportunity, if you want, still exists. You need, even if you go to a fully federated model where the domains, the business areas, the business units own, the data products independently and go off and develop them, you still need the glue that brings all that together, the interaction between the different groups in terms of how do I decide if this is the same, if this is still customer, or if it's that customer has gone through a journey and it's now something different. It's now a fulfilled customer, or it's a retired customer, or whatever. How do I decide if there are attributes that have significantly changed through the journey? So that discussion needs to happen, and that happens more easily and more clearly in a.
Okay, that's a great example, right? This idea that a customer turns into a former customer, and we can go back and try to get them, but that level of decision making historically in organizations is pretty high. Right? Like the person that's going to make that call from a business context is up there in that business unit, probably not down there with dealing with the data every day. And like, I always feel like the decisions get locked in some director level, but the real business decisions way high. It never gets up there because they don't know how to, the higher you get, the dumber we all are. And so like, I need it served up on a platter in really nice, concise wording. So I can take my 3.2 seconds and say yes or no. Like, how do you facilitate that then? Is that part of sort of your governance model, or like what happens?
Well, I think that's where data governance has failed us. Because to pick up on your point about the different levels, this idea of principles, policies, and standards, and different things going on at different levels, decisions being made about how you interact. I think what happens is you might, from a traditional data governance framework, you might get those principles levels, but principle level, but do they really translate into things that people do as part of their day-to-day analytics build and so on, right?
What I'm fighting with is, as I think of like my customers in their real life, like lives in organizations.
Yeah.
Is data's become power, right? And so everybody wants to control it because they want. Again, as goofy as it is, we live in politics, right? And like we always try to put governance and models to like just make it a little easier and not get caught in the game. I keep sitting there going, what I don't see is the right people making the decisions at the right levels for the big items in an organization, right? Like, hey, here's what we actually consider a current customer. Here is a customer historically with us. Here is a new customer. Like these definitions are really important to organizations. And the data work doesn't feel to get to the people that have that holistic view of work. And I guess I'm just trying to say, are we in the world of politics, or are there systematic ways of doing that?
Well, I think the root cause of this is probably even more basic and fundamental
Okay.
than that, right? So the issue here is that when people aim at data governance has been, frankly, a challenge. And if you ask some people, a bit of a failure, just in terms of,
You spend a lot of money on it, and it doesn't seem to make life better.
yeah, like how has it actually changed the situation? And, you could argue that that's a function of the tooling that hasn't been present in order to support that happening. But, but governance is, in my opinion, an outcome. What you should really be aiming at is, how do I create trust and sharing? And then, of course, there needs to be an appropriate use wrapper that wraps around that.
Okay.
So, you're right that I think your observation is that decisions get made at the principal level, which is, maybe a governance forum level, and then push down the organization, when what really needs to happen is the people who use the data on a day-to-day basis, and therefore define its use, that should be driven up through the organization. And if a framework needs to be put in place to make decisions around that on behalf of the organization as a whole, it'll work. But typically it's easier to deal with the principal level at the high level and then try and push those decisions down. But when it hits the ground level of the people building the analytics and the reports, it doesn't work for them.
Well, because I think you sit there and say, hey, a new customer is a customer we've had for the last 2 months, right? And so that gets made up here. And then you try to make that a data issue, and you're like, well, we don't actually, well, like, does that mean they were never a customer before, or they were gone for a year, or do they have to be away for a month, and then they're back? Like, and then all of a sudden, the reality of all those definitions falls apart, and you get some lackluster version of what the intent was.
That kind of comes back to what I said about the tooling. Is I don't think there really has been a great place or a great way of bringing all of those business definitions from the different business units, including their perspectives on those, into a single context where you can see that and know that what you're using is what you think you're using. So instead, because you're busy and it's not your job to think about how the mechanics of a single piece of data operate across the whole organization, you just invent your own view of it. And hopefully it's consistent, and hopefully, but that's changed. Right? There are tools out there now that can help you to bring that together. And I think the crucial point here is, if you join it back to data as a product, we talked about these principles, policies, and standards. Those need to be consistent as they interoperate. Right, and I was going to say trickle down, but I don't think it's.
I don't think trickle down works. I think it's a proven economic theory. Okay.
They need to be consistent, but they also need to be applied. And data as a product brings those things into the actual code of a data product and executes those as just part of the day-to-day life of someone building data products. And so you're automatically helping them to do the right thing. And in a it's called different things in different models, but like this concept of federated computational governance takes governance and pushes it into the level where the people actually building the data products use it. And that means like detailed technical standards, definitions, metadata, all those things are kind of encapsulated as part of the data product. And then
you see companies spending, like, to me, when you say that to me, I just see dollar signs and head counts. And I guess my question is, like, okay, that makes sense, right? Are organizations spending the money to sort of create that data product view with the right view people, or are they still like, are they putting their money where their mouth is on things they need to fix, or what's happening there right now?
Yeah, I think they know. I think most of them know it's a journey, and quite a few of them have sold the data transformation program based on the benefits it's going to realize. And
Yeah.
potentially they've got traction with the business because the business is dissatisfied with data as a service more generally, and what they're getting access to and what they can do with it and how it can empower their business and so on. So they've got traction on these things, but they still need to find models that are actually going to deliver those benefits, and that's where they're really struggling, is just to fill that gap between the conceptual understanding. Well, I know I have an imperfect way of operating my data management model, and now what do I do? What are the methods? What are the tools? How do I bring those together in a way that kind of creates as we talked about, the trust, the sharing, the transparency around data products, in a way that means I can innovate instead of just reinventing the wheel in different pockets of the business and of IT.